Hi, everyone. Welcome to Home Cooking with Foodland. Um, we're excited about today's class. And before we talk about today's class, I hope that some of you made your Caesar salad and you did some seared ahi. I heard an interesting story from someone who talked about how they were doing it with me. They had their blocking and ahi ready to go. And then they turned around and they came back and the piece was gone. It's because their pet decided to jump in and have fun with it. And so, I felt bad, but at the same time, this is a family show and we shared with the family. So, that's very cool. But don't forget to send us your pictures. I didn't see any pictures this week, so please send some. This week, we're going to do a dish that was really inspired by a suggestion that someone had given us, one of the viewers, and they said, hey, can you do some dishes that are freezable and shareable? And that's a great idea. And I thought about like, what could it be? And I went back and forth and I was like literally on the fence. Like I was going to do lasagna, but then I thought about it and I'm like, what would be really fun to do, because we want to do local stuff too, is to do like luau. And the reason why I picked that is because, again, it's local and we'll talk about that, but it's freezable. And the thing that I wanted to mention is that when you think about a luau, it's a stew or a braise. And when I was thinking about what freezes well, the things that I think freeze well are stews, braises, casseroles. And so outside of the class, if you want to do some bulk cooking for yourself and to share with others, in general, I would say if you're doing something that's a casserole, a braise, or a stew, and even a soup, those you can make in batches. You can freeze them in small containers, and they're perfect for sharing. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. We're gonna do beef luau today, and I'm very excited. It's one of my favorite dishes, and it's very comforting. And I think that also fits for the times where people are looking for comforting things, and just like it just hits the spot every time. So we'll start, and I have a piece of beef here. This is chuck, and you might have short rib or something else that you want to work with, but this is what we're gonna be working with today. And we're gonna go ahead and dice it. I'm gonna start heating up my pot real quickly. And I gotta make sure I don't overheat it, but we'll get this thing going. Chuck's a great piece of meat, very flavorful. Not one of those cuts that you typically wanna make a steak with because it's not a super tender cut, right, just like seared, but it's great flavorful thing for braising, roasting. So pot roast, stew, etc. Wonderful piece of meat to work with. So we'll go ahead and cut this. And I'm really looking. I'm gonna make like stew sized pieces, and so I'm just gonna go and follow the seams. These are the seams, right? You don't have to follow the seams, but when you cook this, if you were to cut it against the seam, this is typically how it would fall apart, right? So we'll go ahead and follow the seams, and then I'm gonna cut this piece here, which is one solid muscle. I'll just kind of cut it in the middle, and I'm shooting for at about 1.5 to 2 inch pieces. You don't have to be exact. Remember that they're gonna shrink down a little bit when you sear them, okay? We'll go ahead and cut this out. And of course, I'm using another cutting board because I'm using raw meat. If you don't have one, that's fine, but you just wanna make sure that you are cleaning your board before you move on to the next thing. And I know that it's very quiet, and I'm assuming it's because I forgot to tell everyone, hey, if you have any questions, please use your question and answer function in your Zoom app. Okay, so here's our beef. We're gonna go ahead and start to get that ready for searing. I have a pot here. I'm gonna turn it up to high now. And the thing about searing and cooking, and we've talked about this before, is again, you want a pot, whatever brand is up to you, but you want something that has got some good weight on it. This one, as you notice, has a very thick bottom, and the reason I chose it is because it conducts heat very well and it holds the heat very well. And when I'm searing and I'm cooking, a thinner pan gives you uneven heat and it cools off too quickly. So I want to make sure I'm using a pan or a pot that is sturdy enough so that when I start to put pieces of product in there, it doesn't drop the temperature so fast and then I'm suddenly steaming, okay? So I'm gonna just put a very thin layer of oil in the pan, and I'm using, this happens to be peanut oil, but the key is neutral flavored, something that has a high smoke point. So peanut oil, canola oil, grapeseed oil, avocado oil, all of those I think work really well. You know, some people might ask, well, what about coconut oil? Or you could use that, but it does impart a coconut flavor, a mild flavor. So if that's something you're looking for, that could work. And when I think about the dish here, it could work. It could work. It gives it a nice creamy kind of a essence and adds a layer of complexity. So if that's something that you want to do, I think I can see it. Okay.
Can you use a cast iron pan?
You can absolutely use a cast iron pan. Those are great for working with. I have one. I don't use it very much, but cast iron is great because it's heavy gauge, it's thick, and it will hold the heat. So if you have one, please use it. The thing about cast iron, you also need to know how to take care of it, right? So if you're not taking care of it properly, that's where it gets tricky. When I'm cooking at home these days, I'm looking for like speed and ease of cleaning. And so I'll use, I'm using, actually what I really have fallen in love with is anodized cookware, because it has a non-stick surface, but it's not like Teflon coated. And so I find that it works really well for me. Now I'm looking for it to get this nice and hot. And what I'm looking for is, you see, if I shake it, you're starting to see little ripples in here. And what I'm trying to wait for is wisps of smoke. You can also test, right? You can put it in here and see if you're getting it here. It's close, but I want to go a little hotter. One thing to note too is, notice the beef here. For the most part, it's dry. I don't want a whole bunch of moisture. When you're cutting your beef, let's say maybe you're using a frozen piece and there's a lot of moisture that's coming off, you really want to blot that, because that's gonna really cause a lot of splatter when you put it in the pan. And also it'll drop the temperature, and it inhibits the browning process. The reason we're browning this is because it's gonna add flavor. That caramelization, we've talked about it before, the caramelizing of the proteins, the sugars and the proteins here, is the Maillard reaction. And that's flavor. Now, the other thing that you might notice is that I'm trying not to overcrowd the pan, because I don't want to drop the temperature too much. What were you going to say, Cheryl? Sorry.
Do you have to use oil if your pan is a non-stick pan?
I still recommend using a fat of some kind, even if you're using a non-stick pan, unless the piece of, whether fish, beef, pork, or even vegetable, has enough fat on it that it's gonna sear, right? In this case, this piece of beef here is very lean, right? And I do want to help it brown, and the fat's gonna help it brown. Now, it's up to you how much fat you want to put in the pan. I'm putting a little bit, I'm being a little generous with it, because that fat's gonna really help with the browning process. And when I take the beef out, I'm gonna blot it, and then I'm gonna remove any excess fat, so that I'm controlling how much fat's really coming and going from this pan here, okay? We're gonna let this start to brown, and then we're gonna start working on the onions now. So the recipe calls for about a pound of onions, and so I have 2 onions here. Usually 2 average size onions is a pound. They're about 8 ounces each. So we're just gonna roughly cut these. And these are sweet onions. If you don't have them, yellow onions will work fine. But I have noticed, as I've started these days, that, I always knew sweet onions they're less, I guess, they don't quite cause the same crying factor. I guess they cause not as harsh on the eyes, and they're more subtle. It does make a difference in the cooking. So if you can afford the difference between yellow onions versus a sweet onion, it does matter. It gives you a milder eating experience, and it's really great. If you got to use a lot of onions and you're gonna cook them down, maybe not so much, because not so economical. But in this case, I think I'm using 2 onions. It's worth it in the overall dish. Now let's go back and see what we have on the beef here. what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to brown this, right? So I'm gonna turn these over. You see that color? That's what I'm looking for. Now you can cover, you can just flip them over and do both sides, or you can keep turning them and get a really good crust on there. The better crust you get on this, the more flavor you're gonna impart into the dish. So we'll let that cook a little bit. And one thing I want to mention, sorry, is when you're cooking, right? I don't know if you notice this, but I'm constantly cleaning and wiping because that's one of the things that we learn when we're in the kitchen, and it just helps. I think the discipline and constantly cleaning as you're going really makes a difference in your kitchen. But I think psychologically, it does add something to the dish because that sense of order that we like to have in the kitchen, I think translates into dishes. Now I'm cutting the stem off a little bit. Okay, this one's good. Cut over here. If you were making stock, you could use these to make stock. I'm not making stock, so I'll let those go. And then I'm just gonna cut these. Again, I like to, when I'm cutting julienne, I'm cutting with the grain, okay, right? I'm gonna cut these thin because I want them to break down in the sauce. Just for fun, I wanna show you, if I cut this way, see the difference? I'm having these really, as I get out here, I'm gonna get these really, kind of like really heavy shapes here, and I like this better. I mean, they're still sort of curved, but when you cook them, going with the grain gives you a different experience, okay? I'm gonna go check our beef real quick. I'm gonna stir them around a little bit. So I'm gonna actually start to take them out so we can get the next batch going. But like I said, I have a paper towel that I'm gonna use to drain these pieces. Now, when you're doing this at home, well, some of you are actually probably doing it with me right now. I'm taking them out now because I need to keep this moving so that I can show you everything that I want to show you in the time limit that I have. But if you have time at home, like what you see here, I would take it and I'll just do it. Actually, you know what? I'll just do it. I'm gonna push it down so that I can keep browning it. But what I am gonna do is move on to the next batch. And notice, you know, a lot of people will be like, you know what? I'm just gonna throw all the meat in one shot. The problem is you're gonna overcrowd the pan and you won't get it to brown like this. And when you cook and you're making stews and you're browning, it's important to always have room to move in the pan, okay? If you've not done it this way and you've always wondered why, I throw everything in my pan and suddenly there's no sound and it's just steam coming out, that is why, okay?
Can you cover the pan to prevent splatter?
You can, I do that sometimes. In a pan of this size, you can. The thing that you gotta be careful of is if you had a smaller pan or a saute pan and it's not the right temperature and you put the lid on, you start to trap the moisture. And when you trap the moisture, you sort of introduce a steaming technique. So it's like a sear steam. And I've done it before because by closing it, you speed up the cooking process. So you can, I wanna make sure you understand the give and take and what you maybe have to be aware of, okay? But you could do that.
If you're using pork butt, is it the same process if you're using pork butt?
And I should have talked about this, but yeah, if you're gonna use pork butt, same process. If you're gonna use chicken thighs, same process. You get a different flavor experience. If you're gonna do chicken thighs, I would take the bone out and I would use skinless because that skin in this kind of a cooking method, moist method, just the chicken skin just kind of like gets soft and rubbery. But yeah, you can use chicken, you could use pork. Those are great options. Like on the beef too, I use the chuck, but another really delicious cut to use would be like short ribs. I'm gonna turn the fan on because it's getting a little smoky here. But here, take a look. Again, you see how well this browns? It's because I have a high quality pan that's heavy, it's a heavy gauge, and I'm not overcrowding the pan, okay? Now, one thing, I think the recipe I said, you said to season the beef, and you could season the beef. I didn't season the beef, but I'm okay with that because I am gonna be seasoning as I go, and I will impart that back in, okay? Alrighty. Let's see how this, any other questions so far? No questions? You guys are a very quiet group today.
Can you remind us if you cut the onion parallel to the stem or perpendicular to the stem?
Parallel to the stem. I mean, technically, it's not going to change the eating experience, but when we julienne, we go parallel to the skin. Basically, when you look at the onion, we follow our cuts will follow the lines that are already there from the grooves. Okay, so now look at the fat here. I have a little bit of fat here. It's just enough for me to start browning my onions. And I'm going to bring the cutting board here since I have so many. Put them in here. Now, there are recipes that are out there that have ginger in them. You can add ginger if you want. There are also recipes that have garlic. You can add that if you want. But we're trying to caramelize the sugar in these onions. And I'm turning the heat to medium because I don't want it to burn. I want it to caramelize, all right? I want very high heat for the beef. It can handle that. But if I keep this heat really high for the onions, I run the risk of burning them. And you can tell that I turned the heat down because of the sound. When I had the beef in there, if you recall, it was very loud, right? And now it's a mellow sound. It's a much more relaxed, sizzling sound. And again, what we talked about with cooking is visual, it's audio, and it's, how do you say smellable? Well, it's those two. You use all your senses when you cook. So we're gonna start to let this caramelize and brown, and then we can start moving on. So I got our beef here. We'll let that sit. We're gonna caramelize the onions, get some flavor in that, and then we can start to bring the whole dish together.
Can you use stew meat, and could you do this in an Instapot?
You can use stew meat, absolutely. And I have done it with stew meat. I think the thing about stew meat that you need to understand is, you know, that you're gonna get different variations of cuts of beef in the stew meat. In this instance, I'm using chuck, so I have complete control of the cut that I'm using. So, but you can absolutely use stew meat and it would work perfectly fine. If you're in one of our stores, you can also, if you're using pork, you can get adobo, the adobo cut, the pork adobo cut, which would work fine. By the way, if you're gonna use pork, you know, you want, I think shoulder works great, butt works great, loin not so much because it doesn't have enough fat. Belly would work, although belly might be too much fat. So you just want to make sure that you're balancing. You want to make sure there's enough fat in there to work with on slow cooking methods. And also, the benefit of this cooking method is that you're taking a cut of meat that has connective tissue that needs time to break down to add value. Something like a loin or a tenderloin, those are already designed, the cut of meat is designed to be seared and eaten, and it doesn't need a lot of long cooking to make it tender. And that is why they're premium cuts too, right? So you don't want to take a really nice cut of meat that was intended for quick cooking, grilling, that's meant to be eaten either medium rare or rare or just done, and then cook it for 2 hours, okay? So the cut of meat, the appropriate cut of meat for the appropriate cooking technique is very important. And in this case, chuck, perfect cut of meat. It's a value cut of meat relative to ribeye or a New York or strip loin, and it wants to be cooked long, so it matches for this cooking technique that we're doing here.
What about brisket?
Brisket would work great, lots of flavor. You just gotta be careful because there's a lot of fat. So you might have to do a lot of skimming in the process. Okay.
The word you're looking for, several people said, is aromatic.
Thank you.
Oh, quick question. Yeah. What setting was the heat when you were cooking the meat, and what setting is it at now?
Okay. So when I was doing the beef, I had it at high, full blast. Now I have it on like medium, and you see the caramelization that I'm happening, and you hear this difference, right, in the sound, right? By the way, if I was making French onion soup, I'd be really happy right now. Okay. By the way, French onion soup, I throw some Madeira in this thing, put some beef stock, let it simmer. Okay.
Don't forget to tell us how you could do this in an Instapot.
Okay, so here's the thing about Instapot, and the more I work with them, I started to understand that Instapot it's a pressure cooker, right? And so if I was gonna do it in Instapot, I would take the Instapot out of the Instapot, I would put it on here and brown everything on the stove. And the reason why is over time I've learned that Instapot is it's good, but it cannot handle the heat that I need for that. And it always ends up like turning off on me because it's like, cannot handle too much heat. So I use the stove, get it really hot, sear it the way I want, and then I get it simmering on the stove because it's faster. If you looked at a lot of Instapot recipes, it's like they have to time how long it takes for it to get the temperature and the time how long it takes. So that doesn't work for me. So I would get the Instapot, I would have it ready, get that thing simmering. While it's simmering, put it in the Instapot, close the Instapot, turn on the pressure thing. And this is what I learned too. I don't know if it makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't catch the seal. So I hold the lid and I go like that because I'm trying to get the seal to sit properly. And if I've simmered it ahead of time, hang on for a second. If I've simmered it ahead of time on the stove, put it in the Instapot, put the thing on, jiggle it a little bit so that the seal hits properly, immediately I'm ready to go. And then I can time exactly how long I want the pressure cooker to cook. And I will use the settings, the options that you have for stew, soup, but it tells me exactly what I want. And I'll push, I think it's the stew setting. You can push the stew setting and then you can cook it through. And then when it's done, you can check it. Now, there's upside and the downside to it. It's a one pot cooking and you're ready to go. The downside is if the beef cooks very quickly, then it starts to fall apart. And what I don't like when I'm making a braise is my beef to just completely shred. And so I like the control that's on the stove. And you know, when I'm doing this kind of thing, it's a passive cooking technique. So like I'll work or whatever, and it's slowly cooking. I'll check every so often on this thing, but I can control how slowly the movement of this braise is, or the stew is on the stove. And also I feel like the Instapot's great for speed, but there is a difference in the extraction of flavor that you get by doing the traditional method. And so you just need to know that those are the trade-offs that you're going to deal with if you're going to do one or the other, at least in my experience. Okay, let me just check something real quick. Okay, we're almost ready to move on. I'm falling behind but I want to show you. So talk about this. So these are the leaves that we got from the store, and these are called luau. And the word luau means young taro tops. And these are the young taro tops off of a taro plant. In Hawaiian, we call it kalo, right? And kalo was one of the staple foods that really kind of like was a sustenance for Hawaiian culture. And, you know, for those of you that may not be from Hawaii, the whole plant has a corm, and that's the kalo, and that is what in the wetland taro that they used to raise is what is harvested and then it's steamed and mashed to make poi. And then this is the leaf that comes off of that. And the leaf, the big ones are used, and they layer them up and they put pork in them and they wrap them, and then they tie them with tea leaves and they put them in an imu or underground oven, or they steam them. And that's what lau lau is from. And what we're gonna make is luau. So we're taking the young tops of the leaves and we're going to make a stew with that. And that's what we're gonna work with. Now I am wearing gloves. And the reason why I'm wearing gloves, if you're not familiar with this, is because these have what is called, I think I keep saying it wrong, but it's oxalic crystals. And they're microscopic and they do break down with cooking, but they're present in the plant as it grows. And what it does is it creates, if you were to eat this raw, it would potentially constrict your throat and would make it very itchy because these crystals are scratchy and they're very uncomfortable. I wear gloves because my hands also, by working with them over time, it will feel like if you rub yourself accidentally against fiberglass. That's the best way I can describe it. And so you don't want to feel like you swallowed fiberglass. Now, the way we cook these, again, is you cook them long and slow, and that's how it breaks down the crystals. Now, there's a couple of things you can do, depending on what the experience you're looking for. Okay, give me 1 second here. Let's come take a look at it real quick. Okay, so you see the onions? They smell really, really, really delicious. And I'm gonna take them out really quickly because we're gonna get ready to do the, we're gonna put the luau leaves in there. So I'm gonna put this back on. I have water here, or you may have stock. I'm gonna actually put some in now. It's a little bit of variation from the method that I put in the recipe, but I wanna show you this because I think it makes a big difference. So I'm gonna put some water in here, or if you have stock, put some stock in your pot and put it on high so it comes to a rapid boil. And I'll explain, when you see what I'm talking about, it'll all make sense, okay? Okay, now, so we have the leaves, we have stems here. And the stems, you see the difference in the size of the stems. The stems are totally edible. Now you have to make a decision on the eating experience you want. These smaller ones, you could cut them up, and I've done this before, cut them small. Then you can put them in your luau. The bigger stems, totally usable, but what happens is, the bigger the stems are, the outer skin starts to get very thick, and it's really fibrous. And technically you could use these skins, but what I would typically do is peel them and cut them small, and then you can use them. Same thing with the leaves. These are very young leaves. You know, leaves can get big like that, and those are great for making lau lau. But again, they have these ribs. And so if the ribs are really, really big, you might want to cut them out or peel them because they're tougher and they take longer to cook. So that's up to you how you want to use. I'm not going to use them in this cooking because I want them to be more, I want more of the leaves, because the leaves, when you cook them down nicely, they're really tender and silky. Now, you can just tear these up by hand if you want, but I'm going to cut these down real quick.
A lot of questions coming in about what you can use instead of luau leaves, like collard greens, kale,
and you
bok
answered the question.
choy.
You answered the question. So we actually had a viewer ask that question earlier, and the answer, their question was, can I use collard greens? And my answer was absolutely. When you think about collard greens, very similar, needs a lot of cooking, a thick, super green vegetable, so that can work. If you're going to do kale, I would say use lacinato kale or lacinato or Tuscan kale versus curly kale, because the leaf is thicker and leathery. You know, you're looking for a very leathery green to work with. Now the flavor is not going to be the same. It will taste delicious, but what's interesting about, if you've ever smelled a fresh banana leaf, or you've smelled a tea leaf, the similar smell you're getting out of these luau leaves, okay? And I mean, it's interesting because I was thinking about this today, like, how am I going to describe this for people if someone's going to ask me about collard greens? And there's a nuance in the flavor that you're not going to get from collard greens or lacinato kale. And I'm trying to describe it. It's an earthiness. If you would envision the smell that you smell when you're boiling sweet potatoes, the skin from the sweet potatoes creates a certain earthy, lightly sweet smell that I think you don't get from the kale or the collard greens. And this is what that has. And so if you think about even tea leaves or banana leaves, you know, when you go to if you go to a Southeast Asian restaurant that's doing steamed or baked banana leaf dishes, that flavor that you get is not present in those two vegetables that we just talked about. That said, don't let that stop you, because you're gonna have a delicious dish. And if you do the lomi tomato and you do some of the other things, I think you're gonna have something that is very close, but it'll just be a little bit different. Okay, so we have all of this luau. Look at this. I did all this ahead of time. And so this is what we have here. This is all of that, okay? And the thing that I wanted to show you was, you know, the recipe says layer it in a pot and then hold it down. You need a really big pot for this, right? So I'm not gonna do that, but I know I need liquid. The recipe says to put liquid on top after you put it in. But what I'm gonna do now is I have my liquid in. If you have your stock, and what I'm gonna start to do is put this in the pot now. And what's gonna happen is it's gonna start to break down, right? It's gonna start to steam so that I can fit all of this in here.
About how many luau leaves did you use, or if it came in a bag, did you use
so the bag that I got was a 5-pound bag, local. It was from Wong's from Kaneohe, a 5-pound bag that we sell in our stores. And so I used the whole 5-pound bag. Well, I'm sorry. I used half of the 5-pound bag, so about 2.5 pounds. And the recipe calls for 2 pounds, right? So I think that works. But see how it's already breaking down, right? It's starting to steam and it's kind of wilting, and that's why I'm starting it this way, so that I can fit everything in the pot. Okay.
By any chance, do you know if we sell frozen luau leaves?
That's why I love it that you guys all these questions, because I think, you know, like on the weekend, I'm like, hey, there's all the things I'm going to share with everyone, and I forget. Yes, we sell frozen, and you can use frozen too. Yeah, we sell the pre-cooked frozen one in bags, and so you can buy that, and it speeds up the process. That said, if you are interested in if you really want to do one, you should try it this way, because you will see a difference. And the difference is the frozen product, although it's very good, is cooked really cooked. In this application, if you do it yourself, it's not going to cook down as far, and so that stuff is almost like puree. It's so cooked. Where when I show you what we have finished here, you're still going to have pieces in here, so you're going to have a textural difference. But it does make it very convenient versus having to like go buy a huge bag, pick up the stems, get all the crystals on your hands, you gotta find gloves. So I get that too. So I'm gonna add all this in, and you see how long, if I had just put the beef and the onions back on top, it wouldn't have fit. You see how it's working its way down as it's starting to steam? And all that liquid I need anyway, right? I'm actually gonna add some more liquid.
And you're at high temperature?
Full blast. All the way, as hot as your stove will go. And I need more liquid.
And sometimes you say stock. Is that the same as broth?
Yeah, I mean, depending on who you talk to, like you could sit in a cafe and debate stock and broth for hours. But yeah, essentially, yeah. I mean, a stock, from a definition perspective, a stock typically is something that was cooked with bones, etc., and it's not quite as concentrated in flavor, where a broth may have started out as a stock and is reduced by half. So when you look at the stores, I mean, you see bone broth and beef stock. I think in my experience, they're very similar on a, I guess, in a grocery store level. Bone broth, I think in general, will be more concentrated in flavor though, versus like beef stock. So I think those are the two differences, but I think I guess the point is you can use them interchangeably. Yeah.
And how did you know to add more water? Like what level of liquid are you looking to achieve?
Yeah, so the reason I added more water and I chose to add more water is because as I added more of the leaves, I wasn't hearing and feeling the steam come up. It's because it was having a hard time keeping up with the wilting of the greens, and I want this steam to come up, and that's what's helping break down the greens. So that's why I should have told you that, but I didn't see the steam, and that's why I added the normal water. And you see the level? The level that I'm looking for is to just come up just to the top of these greens when when it's fully wilted. And by the time I'm pushing it down to try to accelerate it, but I think you'll see that it will be right at that level.
And could you put the lid on the pot to allow it to steam faster?
Yeah, that would steam it. That would speed it up. But then we wouldn't be able to talk story. We would go too fast. But yeah, you can do that at home. Okay, so you see how like my guess worked out, right? It's wilted. The liquid is right at the level. Okay. So the next thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add my onions in here. And by the way, while we're talking, you saw me add some salt in there, right?
Yes. And what's the difference between Hawaiian salt and alaia? Alaia.
So alaia salt, people use the terms interchangeably, but I think Hawaiian salt, many would argue, is the white stuff, right? It's just the salt. It's just sea salt that has been harvested, and it's in the same size as the alaia salt. The alaia salt is the red salt, right? And that is basically you're taking red clay soil and adding to it so it gives it a nice minerally flavor to it.
And so so there's a difference in taste.
Yeah, you're gonna get sort of that clay mineral flavor in the red salt versus the white salt.
And how did you know that your luau leaves are cooked?
They're not actually cooked yet.
Oh.
It just wilted. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm putting the beef on the top. I have my luau leaves on the bottom, and I have my onions in here. And what I'm gonna do is now it's coming up to a nice boil, right? And so the next step that I'm going to do is I'm gonna turn this down to low. I'm gonna put the lid on. And what happens now is, this is when you can go binge watch Netflix. But what we're gonna do now is we're gonna slow cook this, and we want to cook this for like 2 hours. And what you're looking for is you want the leaves to become very tender, and you want the beef to get tender. Now, what I would recommend you do is I layered them, right? You have to resist the temptation to stir the whole thing up. You want it to cook slowly that way because the beef is sitting on the leaves, and it's slowly the flavor is gonna go into the leaves, and I want it to slowly cook to get tender. You also have to be very careful when you watch it at this point because you need to maintain, see, like I said, the moisture here, and I actually should put a little bit more moisture on it. I want to put moisture. What I'm looking to do is just get to the line of the beef. Just, go ahead.
Oh, and if you were using the stems, what layer would you put the stems on?
You can mix the stems with the leaves. They're all gonna cook at the relatively same rate. Okay, so I'm covering this, but you gotta check it. You gotta make sure the moisture stays in here because as the moisture evaporates, the density gets very thick. And if it gets too thick and you're not checking, it might scorch on the bottom. And that's happened to me before. So you gotta kind of keep an eye on it and check it every so often and make sure it's not literally set and forget because of that. It's so thick. There's so much fiber in here that you want to make sure you keep an eye on it, okay?
What do you think about adding sweet potato if someone's trying to mimic the flavor of the taro leaf, and where would you put that?
So I thought about that too. I was like, I wonder if I should tell people to put sweet potato in there. You could throw a sweet potato in there like right now if you with your collard greens, and it would cook in there. And when the potatoes tender, you could take it out and slice that. The other thing I considered telling everyone to do is take sweet potato peels and put them in there to get the flavor, and then take them out. So I've never done either of those two things, but worth experimenting with. And I'm looking at Cheryl. I'm gonna ask her to nod whether you think that there's a sweet potato essence in the room now. You smell that sweet potato leaf kind of
yes.
banana thing?
Yes. Okay. What about using baking soda to keep the green color of the luau leaves?
That I've heard of before. I don't think that it could be, I could be wrong. So it could work. I don't typically put baking soda in mine. I wasn't sure that the baking soda was what's really keeping the color versus my understanding was people added baking soda as an alkaline to help break down the luau leaves. And so when I did a dish similar to this for Hawaii Food and Wine Festival. And for me, what helped me keep the leaves very, very green was I cooked it just till they're done, and then I pureed them and I kept them separate from the beef and the jus, and that worked for me. If it's working for you, then that's great. I haven't done that experiment with that because I just didn't feel, I didn't think that putting the luau leaves was the baking soda is what I wanted to do. But I guess you guys have to experiment with that. Could work. And if you're doing that already and it's working for you, then great. So we're gonna make some lomi tomato. And lomi, the word lomi means to mix or sort of like massage, right? So we're gonna make some lomi tomato. We're gonna lomi this mixture. And if you've been to luau's, you've seen lomi tomato. And originally the dish was lomi salmon. I think this dish actually is Chinese in origin, I'm trying to think. And you think about Hawaiian culture, like when the native Hawaiians came, no tomatoes, I don't think they had onions, and definitely not salmon, right? So the dish evolved from when you think of I think it was sandalwood trade when it started to be commerce, right? In ships, and they would bring salmon, salted salmon, and salted salmon was an ingredient that, held well, was preserved. The dish sort of evolved. I think the long rice is the Chinese dish that became Hawaiian luau food. But either case, tomatoes were introduced, salted salmon was introduced, and this made its way onto luau menus. Now, a lot of places when they're making lomi salmon or lomi tomato, they're using conventional tomatoes, and we've talked about this before, which are gassed greens, meaning they're picked green and gassed, and the gas induces ripening. And so you might not get quite the tomato flavor. And so I'm using vine ripened tomatoes here from the Big Island, so that I'm looking for tomato flavor. And when we cook, right, the goal that we're trying to do is build flavor. And so if I'm starting with ingredients that have great flavor, then that's most of the battle right there. A lot of people, or lots of times if you're picking ingredients that don't have a lot of flavor, then you got to do a whole lot of work to try to make it taste good.
Can you remind us about how much salt you put in the pot?
Yeah, I put probably a tablespoon in there, and then I'll adjust later. I'll check it and I'll adjust later. I just lightly sprinkled it over the top.
And that was the only seasoning, right?
That's correct. That's the only seasoning I put.
If you were to put sweet potatoes in the pot, how long would you cook it for?
Sweet potatoes probably take 30 to 45 minutes depending on the size. And so, when you're getting close to that, you want to check to see what the doneness looks like. And you want to go ahead and pierce it with a fork or a cake tester or a skewer. When your skewer goes in and it doesn't resist the skewer, then you know you're done. So we've got the tomatoes in there. This is a piece of a sweet onion. This is a Eva sweet that I'm going to go ahead and mince and throw in there. Now, like when you go to luau's, the dice of the onion is usually the size of the dice of the tomato. But so I think that's just too much. It's too strong. So I'm going to go finer. And so I'm going to cut into the onion, but not all the way to the root. And then I'm going to slice down a little bit.
Question about sweet potato again. Yeah. Would you put the whole sweet potato in the pot, or would you slice it and put it in the pot?
Hang on for a second. So I would put the whole thing in. If it's small, I would put the whole thing in. There's like an Okinawan sweet potato, which tend to be small. I'll put the whole thing in. And then when it cooks, then I would cool it and then slice it, because I think it cooks better. It holds together better that way. If I was gonna slice it and throw it in, it might fall apart. Where you run the risk of it falling apart, and you also run the risk of it discoloring, because of the leaves will throw off a really blackish color into the liquid.
And why would you choose to use a whole tomato like that instead of a grape tomato or a cherry tomato?
You could use those will work great too, and they're very vibrant in color. I feel like I use whole tomatoes too much, and I thought you guys might think that I'm like, trying to promote those guys. No, I'm just kidding. They're really delicious, but I mean, these are also really great too, and it's fast, right? If I was going to do cherry tomatoes, I'd have to like one at a time, and we'd be here for a long time. So, and I also wanted to make something that looked more like Lomi tomato that you might see in a luau. But you can use cherry tomatoes. The thing that's interesting though is also too much of a good thing can be too much of a good thing, right? And so those cherry tomatoes or whole farms are super sweet, low acid, and might be too sweet for something like this. This is a great tomato, but it still tastes, it's a more of a high acid tomato, and I kind of want that for the dish too. So we have green onions. Again, like in a lot of places, you're gonna see green onions that might be like the size of the actual tomato dice. I'm gonna go thinner. I'm trying to go milder.
While you're doing that, can you tell us what the size of your pot is?
That is an 8-quart pot, and I'm so happy that you asked, because literally I just got that pot because I have a 4-quart pot, and every time I cook pasta, it overboils, and so I'm like, grr. And I just got that pot, and I just very happy. So 8 quarts. So I got my onions in here, and like if you wanted to, right? You could put some salted salmon in there. If you're going to use salted salmon, you want to make sure that you rinse the salted salmon so you can get all the extra salt out before you put it in. I'm going to put some opai in here because I want a little bit more umami in here. I want some of that meaty flavor. These are dried shrimp. You can find them in Asian markets. I'm going to just rough chop a little bit. And one of the things that I remember, well, I remember what I was raised doing, and I do every so often when I do Hawaiian food, is you take these opai, right? Put them in a little dish, put chili pepper water on them, let them soak up the water, get soft. Really delicious condiment. So if you've not done that, you should try it. Sprinkle this over the top. I gotta find my salt. Where did I put my salt? Some Hawaiian salt in here. If you don't have alae, go ahead and use your Hawaiian salt or your kosher salt or your whatever salt you got, and go get some dirt from your yard, throw it inside, be good. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is just kind of stir this up, and I want liquid, right? Some of the liquid's coming out. And I don't know if it's just like psychological, but one of the things that we always did, even when I had poke when I was a kid, I think part of it was to keep it chilled while you're outside, but we always used to throw ice cubes in here. And what I think the ice cubes do is gonna really drop the temperature, cool it off, but also as it melts, it's gonna come together with the juices from the onions and the tomatoes, and the salt and the opai, and you're gonna have a really kind of very delicious condiment or side dish.
Why wouldn't you lomi this with your hands?
Because I know that someone might email me and say, hey, why are you using your hands? You're just kidding. You can totally use your hands, but part of it too is like these days when I'm in a professional kitchen, like the using of the hands is like I gotta put gloves on. It's like hand contact, all this stuff. So it's just a habit too. You can totally use your hands.
Would you ever put jalapeno in that too?
I would not put jalapeno because it has a jalapeno flavor, it has a certain pepper flavor. But I have this, I never opened it. But we have chili pepper water. So you could put chili pepper water for heat. Now this is Park's brand. But basically what chili pepper water is local bird vegan chilies or Thai chilies would work. It's a very neutral chili, but hot. You put that in with garlic, water, Hawaiian salt. Some people put a little vinegar. You simmer it till it's very soft, and you puree it. So it's making, that's what in Hawaii we use for hot sauce. That would be great in here. Okay. Now let's look at what we got. So you're seeing this all come together. Now I want to show you what it looks like when it's good. When it's we're gonna finish the dish. What I did want to show you is a secondary method. This is all one cooking together, right? But I also want to show you, let's say you have two small pots. Can you hear me? Because I think my earbuds just died. Can you guys hear? Yeah? Okay, so I wanted to make a method here that showed how to do two pots. And so what I have here, this is just the beef that I browned with the onions, and it had water. Like I started this earlier today, and the water was at the full level, and gradually it's been reducing, and I've been concentrating the flavor. Okay, and you can see now the beef here is nice and tender. Like literally, if you wanted to just do this, it would be very delicious. And now here, what I have here, these are the luau leaves that have been cooking for quite a while. They've been cooking for 3 or 4 hours, and they're very soft, and they're very luxurious, and they're very delicious looking, right? And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the two and I'm going to marry them together, and we're going to have a finished dish. And what I wanted to show you is like this: if you don't have a big pot like this, don't try to jam everything into a small pot, because you're gonna be hating life. And I wanted to show you that if you don't have the pot, there's ways you can still get to it. Cook this separately, and then bring them together. And you bring them together, they will be delicious immediately. But you let them sit together for an hour, cool it off overnight, come back tomorrow. It's really going to be amazing because all the flavor marries. It's kind of like, you can make stew, you make chili, right? The next day is always better, right? So I'm going to go this way so you can see. We're going to add that in. Sorry, big splash. For those of you that are doing this together with us tonight, you should have something that looks kind of like this right now. So trust in the process, right? Keep the temperature low, let it do its thing, and then eventually it will look like this. And this is what, it smells really good.
Can you tell us again how to make Hawaiian chili pepper water?
Absolutely. Give me 1 second. I'm admiring the coming together of, you see how some of this is breaking up? If you do the Instant Pot, a lot of this happens, and you don't get a lot of this necessarily because the pressure cooker is really an aggressive cooking technique, right? And so all that agitation and pressure breaks things up a lot. Okay, so chili pepper water. You take fresh Hawaiian chilies, or the things like bird peppers, or a neutral hot chili, right? You just throw it in a pot, and maybe, let's say you put 6 chilies in a pot, throw 2 garlic cloves, put 1.5 cups or 2 cups of water, a pinch of Hawaiian salt or regular salt, bring it to a boil, cook it till the chili peppers and the garlic is completely mush. Throw it in a blender, blend it, season it if you need more seasoning, and add vinegar to taste. And I think you'll be very happy. Okay, let's come on this side here. We're gonna bring this all together. Okay, so here's our beef luau. Again, you could do it with pork. You could do it with chicken. You could take out your sweet potato, slice it up, put it on the side. That's gonna be really nice. Let me get a bowl real quick. Of course, there's 2 ways you could eat this, right? You could eat this with, I would say, 2-day-old poi. But you could also, like, a lot of us, we're gonna just eat it with rice because this is something we have around. It's a staple, it's simple, and it really, it's really, really yummy. So I have some rice that I cooked. We'll put some in the bowl here. You could. I think it would change the dish a little bit. It would make it definitely creamy. You can. I mean, one of the things that I was wondering if anyone was going to ask about was squid luau, right? Which is luau, but using octopus and coconut milk. And we have a recipe on foodland.com if you want to make squid luau. And what's interesting about that is that recipe we did, and we put butter in it. And I never thought about this, but the recipe method that I showed has butter in it, and to me it seemed reasonable and it's delicious. But it sparked a really big debate about why butter is in there, and I think it's really good. But if you want a squid luau recipe, which has coconut milk in it, that's a good place to take a look. So, we'll put some on here. You see the pieces of beef that again, depending on how aggressive you go with your Instapot, may be breaking up, right? So I'll just make sure that we can see some of the beef here because I think it looks nice.
And if you're not using luau leaves, you're using something like collard greens or kale, could you add a few drops of liquid smoke?
You could, but this dish is not smoky. There is no smoke in this dish. I think if you're thinking about smoke, you might be thinking of a lau, which is sort of smoked because it's cooked in the ground where they put coconut stumps and leaves, and the hot rocks create a sort of a smoky flavor. But this dish is not, I would not describe it as being smoky. However, you could do that. If you started to add liquid smoke and you're doing something with pork and collard greens, in my head, it's starting to sound like, like ham and collard greens, which is very southern in its application. That said, you could do it.
And then how long can you keep this in your freezer? How long can it be frozen?
For quite a while. I mean, I don't know exactly, but it can go quite a while if your freezer's good, and as long as you got it in a kind of container that it's not getting freezer burn. I think it can go quite a while. So I'm gonna show you real quick. This is kind of like what the dish looked like. Humble dish, and I think we talked about David Chang in the past, and one of the things he has a show is called Ugly Delicious. And one of the things that I have always thought about luau stew is it is not the prettiest dish. I did add the lomi tomato because I thought that it would make it prettier, right? But it is not, it's a humble dish. It's really great tasting. It's very, very, very yummy, but it is a humble dish. And so here we have our beef luau with lomi tomato. I have chili pepper water here on the side, so you can use that as a condiment. And like I was talking about it, but I wanted to show this to you. So I'm gonna take some of that opai, or dried shrimp, and then I am gonna add a little bit of chili pepper water so you can see what that looks like. If you've not done this before, I think it's really, really a great condiment to eat along with your beef luau. And so there's our dish. A simple, humble dish, but what makes it delicious, taking the time to properly brown the beef and properly caramelize the onions and allow them to cook till they're nice and tender. Don't forget to season properly, and the lomi tomato, right? You can totally use the grape tomatoes or smaller tomatoes to be much sweeter. But I do think if you've been typically using just conventional tomatoes, at least try making this with a vine ripened. It would be really interesting too if you happen, like I think right now is season. If you can get your hands on some heirloom tomatoes, it'd be really cool. You can get some green gauge tomatoes or some brandy wines and do a really cool riff on that. It would be really delicious. I think the coconut milk idea is interesting. It just, like I said, it makes it creamier. So here's our dish. Any last minute questions? No? Well, I'm glad you guys all joined. One of the things we're looking to do next week, as long as it's in our stores, is to do something with breadfruit. Really interesting starchy vegetable that we have here in Hawaii and in a lot of the Polynesian cultures. They're making a really big push on it because it's very nutritious, and you can make things like breadfruit flour with it. But if we can get our hands on some of it and it's in our stores, we'll work with it. We'll show you guys how to do something with it, and we can have a lot of fun. So thanks for joining us. Please, I want to see those pictures, everyone. Send us some pictures, and we hope you guys have a great rest of the week. Thanks now.